Okay, so sorry, my hair looks a little wild. Anyway, so I'm back. It's been a while since I've been here, and I'm sorry about taking so long at doing anything on this channel. I'm pretty busy. I live a pretty busy life, of course, so I don't ever think about it that much. If I prioritize it a little more, I might be able to make time for it. But when I'm still living with my parents for now, and when I move out on my own, I might have more time for it because during the evenings people are here, and I hate recording when folks are here. I despise it. So when I'm living by myself, I'll be able to record a whole lot more probably. But anyway, so I'm just dropping back in to say hi to everybody. I need to figure out how to do video editing and stuff like that. I'm not any good at that stuff at all. So that's something else to have to learn in my already tight schedule. But anyway, so I wanted to briefly mention today, talking about journalism. I've talked to a couple of different journalists this year. One is a political analyst for our local WKNO station. It's in Memphis, and he analyzes state politics and current affairs. And so WKNO is a radio public radio station, and they're affiliated with NPR. So they have high standards, ethics. They're regulated, so they have legal obligations. So they're some of the best journalism in the state. NPR is an excellent news organization within the country. Sorry. Um, and then I talked to another journalist, and I'm not going to say their names right now. Um, that is a reporter for our local newspaper, one of the newspapers here in Gibson County. Thankfully, Gibson County is not a news desert. There's a lot of news deserts throughout the country where all these counties and towns and cities don't have good news access to their local news and information. Thankfully, Gibson County is not one of them. I've talked to the local editor of our paper, and he's very concerned about how it's hard to run a local paper. People are not interested anymore, so I kind of want to advocate for them all the way up from all the way up to as high as Brian Stelter before he was let go from CNN. He advocated, and to be clear, Brian Stelter was not let go from CNN because he sorry, not because he got a story wrong or anything. It was because they didn't really like his way of his style of journalism, his style of programming, and they're wanting to take a new course, so they let him go. He's still qualified as far like he still knows what he's doing. But one of the things that stuck out to me about him, and Brian Stelter helped me a lot, he highly encouraged local news. He always recommended to his audience, he said, "We appreciate you watching CNN. I love to have you watch my show. I want you to watch my show. But more importantly, America needs you as the listener, as the citizen, to subscribe to your local paper. Get to know the journalists and reporters in your local paper because they will be covering what your mayor in your town does affects you very immediately. What your local school board is doing affects you. What your county mayor and county commission is doing affects you. And and you need reporters that dedicate their lives to covering this stuff. It's extremely important to have local news, local media coverage. And I would say our local newspapers are probably somewhat conservative leaning to some degree, as in kind of like their perspective, but they're not like. And of course, I know some people on the left around here. There's not a lot of people in my county that are liberal, but some of the few people I've found that are liberal are actually skeptical of the paper because they know the editor, he's kind of conservative, and so they're very skeptical of him. But I have to say though, I don't always agree with some. I feel like I agree with some everything that the paper does or says, but their original reporting is still fair and accurate. I would argue that they do good work around the county. The only thing I would say is that maybe we need to give them some competition. Maybe there needs to be another paper, or maybe a radio station that covers local or county news or something that can maybe be a counterbalance to them. But of course, they're not very ideologically driven. And I know some people from there now. I've met the editor. I like him a lot, and I think he had some interesting perspective. He didn't talk a whole lot, but he talked some, and I liked what he had to say. So I do largely have trust and confidence in what they report. I think they're pretty fair. They have a balance of views in the newspaper, as far as I'm concerned, because one editor at one of the, because there's a family owns a few different papers within the county. There's like 3 or 4 papers, at least 4, I think. And the editor of one paper is kind of more conservative leaning. The editor of another paper is kind of more left leaning. Neither one are like extremely far though. Like they're pretty, I would say, relatively close to the center. But I think they do an excellent public service, and I recommend you, if you are watching or listening to me, please, whatever you do, start buying your local paper or buy a yearly subscription. I highly recommend it, because what happens in your county is very important. Like my local paper is the Mirror Exchange of Milan. There's the Tri-City Reporter that covers, I think, a bigger chunk of the county. There's the Trenton Gazette. And there's a 4th one I want to say, but I can't remember exactly what it's called. I've talked to the editor, and he talked about it, and I can't remember what it's called. But I highly recommend you. That's one of the things that will help your country, that will help society. Subscribe to local news and information. Watch your local newscast. Your local news and information is almost as important. Actually, I take that back. It's more important than your national news coverage. But as far as national news, there is a news organization that all reporters, the 2 reporters I've talked to, have respect for, is the Associated Press. You cannot go wrong with them. They are nonpartisan. They're nonprofit. They have high journalistic ethics and standards. And to give you an example of how strict they are on their standards, there was a reporter in Phoenix, Arizona. Some people had elevated some of her earlier social media posts from, I want to say, when she was in college, about that was more pro-Palestinian. Because she was very critical of some things that Israel was doing against Palestine. Now, Israel has probably some culpability because, I don't know, they're a pretty muscular little country. But they've been fighting for decades, and we can probably thank the British for that. No offense if you're a Brit, but, I mean, your country meddled in a lot of their affairs, and now they're kind of, well, they've just never been able to get it together since, so, at least so it seems. I don't know enough about it to comment. But anyway, so what I'm saying, though, is she had some pro-Palestinian comments from her earlier days that were still on her social media, like Twitter or something. She lost her job. They showed it to some of the top brass at the Associated Press, and they fired her because her impartiality was extremely important to them. Now, I personally thought that was a bit much. I thought she can still be fair, but their argument was because at the time there was some extreme, like Israel was in Palestine were kind of lobbing attacks back and forth at one another. I remember Al Jazeera, I think, and I want to say maybe even the Associated Press. And I think it was those 2 got hit by Israeli fire, it seems like. And they said, protests broke out all across the country just randomly, like pro-Palestine or pro-Israel or something like that. And they said that what she was covering there in Phoenix was totally separate from from any Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what they were concerned about is protests breaking out in the area. Well, since she's in the area, they would likely call on her to go cover it because that's where she was stationed at the time. But with her having a previous, at least previously anyway, a pro-Palestinian bias, and mind you, this isn't like a left versus right in America type bias. It's a pro-Israel, pro versus Palestine bias. Now, the right's very pro-Israel. The left is actually quite pro-Israel, really, for that matter. To be honest, but there are a growing faction of the left in America that's becoming more pro-Palestinian. But it's an issue because the AP is a global news organization. And for the Palestinians and the Israelis, if they were to read any coverage from the AP and they know that she's pro-Palestine, the Palestinians aren't going to have a problem with it. But the Jews in Israel likely will. And to prevent the perception of bias, people have their own opinions. They're entitled to their own opinions. But when you are a reporter, you've got to check your opinions at the door. You cannot bring them into your reporting at all. There is a certain method, certain ethics you got to follow. And shutting your mouth and just reporting the news is what the AP is very strict on. And so reporters highly recommend them for impartiality and fairness and accuracy. The AP doesn't end up in a lot of scandal. So one of my local news reporters, I asked him, I said, what news organization do you follow or recommend? And he recommended the Associated Press. Apparently, you really can't go wrong with them because he follows our local papers follow some of the manuals and the instructions of the Associated Press. That's kind of their guiding star. So anyway, just something I wanted to talk about. I'm really into journalism. I would like to study it more. I'm trying to kind of get into it a little bit by just studying it. That's why I've got this. I'm talking a little bit, just speaking my mind, as in not like in a partisan way, but just like I hope I'm not come across partisan anyway. I just want to be fair and accurate and just discuss important issues in America and in my state and local communities. I think that's important. But anyway, that's all for now. If you're watching this later, I don't see anybody watching right now, but if for anybody who might watch this later, I do thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.